There's a moment that happens in group conversations that most people never talk about. You open your mouth to speak, and then you stop, not because you forgot what you were going to say, not because you're nervous, but because something in you already knows how this usually ends. The interruption, the polite nod that doesn't lead anywhere, the conversation drifting past you like you were never part of it to begin with, so you stay quiet. And from the outside, it looks like a choice. From the inside, it feels like memory. There's a particular kind of loneliness that shows up when you're surrounded by people. Not the obvious kind, the subtle one, the kind where laughter fills the room, voices overlap, stories bounce back and forth, and yet none of it seems to touch you. You laugh when everyone else laughs. You nod when it's expected. You add a comment here and there. But somehow your presence never quite lands. It's like being physically visible but emotionally unregistered, seen but not counted. And the hardest part is that you can't always explain why it hurts as much as it does. You just know that it does. People who feel invisible in groups rarely remember when it started. There was no single moment where someone said, "You don't matter." It was quieter than that. A pattern, being talked over, being interrupted mid-thought, watching the energy shift the moment you begin to speak. Noticing that no one reacts when you stop contributing entirely. Over time, the mind connects those dots without making a sound, and the conclusion it reaches is simple but heavy. I don't belong here. Psychology tells us that humans are wired for social recognition. Connection isn't just emotional, it's biological. Our brains use social feedback to measure safety. Research in social neuroscience shows that social exclusion activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. That's why being ignored doesn't just feel awkward. It feels sharp, personal, real. When someone feels invisible in a group, it isn't because they lack confidence or charisma, and it's not a personality defect. It's a nervous system response to repeated signals that say, "You are not needed here." Many people assume invisibility is the same as shyness, but it isn't. Shyness is fear of interaction. Invisibility often comes from trying and not being received. These are people who once spoke up, who once shared ideas, who once showed enthusiasm. But after enough moments of being overlooked, something shifts. The effort starts to feel costly. The risk of dismissal begins to outweigh the hope of being heard. So they pull back, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying it started to hurt. Over time, this experience reshapes identity. People who feel unseen often become observers rather than participants. They grow hyper-aware of group dynamics. Who gets interrupted? Who gets attention? Who sets the emotional tone? They notice micro-expressions, pauses, subtle changes in voice. This isn't accidental. It's adaptation. When your voice doesn't carry weight, your brain learns to read the room instead. This heightened awareness often turns into emotional intelligence, but it also becomes exhausting. They understand others deeply, sometimes better than they understand themselves. They sense tension before it's spoken. They anticipate outcomes before conversations end. And yet, they rarely feel safe enough to place themselves at the center. Not because they don't deserve space, but because experience taught them that visibility is fragile. There's also a quiet guilt that comes with feeling invisible, a subtle self-blame. People begin asking, "What's wrong with me?" They replay conversations, analyze tone, reconsider timing, wonder they're too boring, too intense, too quiet, too much. This constant self-questioning slowly erodes self-trust. And once self-trust weakens, even valid thoughts start feeling unworthy of expression. Psychologists call this internalized social invalidation. When dismissal happens repeatedly, the brain no longer needs it from the outside. It begins filtering itself. Thoughts are edited before they're spoken. Emotions are minimized before they're felt. Desires are softened to avoid disruption. Invisibility stops being something that happens to you and starts becoming something you maintain. What's rarely acknowledged is that many people who feel invisible are deeply sensitive in a world that rewards loudness. Sensitivity here doesn't mean fragility. It means depth of processing. They don't just hear words. They feel intention. They don't just react. They reflect. Group environments often move too fast for this inner rhythm. And instead of slowing down, the environment moves on without them. In groups, attention tends to go to those who speak first, loudest, or with the most certainty. Confidence is mistaken for competence. Speed is mistaken for intelligence. People who think before they speak are often left behind, not because their ideas lack value, but because the conversation didn't wait for them to arrive. Over time, this teaches a painful lesson. Timing matters more than truth. There's often history here, too. Many people who feel invisible in adulthood felt the same way growing up, in families where emotions weren't acknowledged, in classrooms where only certain voices were rewarded, in friendships where they were the listener, not the center. The brain learns roles early. And if your role was a quiet one, the easy one, the one who doesn't take up space, you may carry that identity forward without realizing it. The mind is loyal to what's familiar, even when it hurts. Invisibility can start to feel safe, predictable. When you expect nothing, disappointment hurts less. When you don't speak, you can't be dismissed. When you stay small, you avoid conflict. Slowly, invisibility becomes a form of self-protection. But beneath that protection is grief, the sense of being underused, like a book no one ever opens. People who feel invisible often have rich inner worlds, thoughts that connect deeply, emotions that run wide, and carrying all of that alone becomes heavy. That's why moments of genuine recognition can feel overwhelming. When someone truly listens, when they remember something you said weeks ago, when they ask a real question and wait for the answer, the emotional response can seem disproportionate, but it isn't. It's deprivation meeting nourishment. People who feel invisible are not weak. They are often incredibly resilient. They've learned how to self-soothe, how to endure emotional neglect quietly, how to survive without affirmation. But resilience built this way has a cost. It teaches people to disappear instead of advocate. If you've ever felt this way in a group, it doesn't mean you lack value. It means your nervous system learned that visibility wasn't safe or rewarded. And that lesson can be unlearned, slowly, gently, not by becoming louder, but by becoming more rooted. Invisibility is not an identity. It's a response, and responses can change. Reclaiming space doesn't mean dominating conversations. It starts internally, with noticing when you silence yourself, with asking, what am I protecting myself from right now? For some, healing means choosing smaller, safer spaces. For others, it means finishing a sentence, holding eye contact, letting a pause exist without apologizing for it. You are not invisible because you lack substance. You feel invisible because your way of being was never mirrored.